Welcome back, everyone. So it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists, our esteemed panelists. So the first speaker is Rufu Makuluve, who is a lecturer of cultural production at Kaleidoscopio Research Institute in Mozambique. He will be speaking about a topic titled A Sonic Approach to Vernacular Archives and Cultural Memory of the Fishing Communities of Mozambique Island. Okay, over to
you. Thank you very much. As said, I'm Rufus from Mozambique. And I'll be talking a bit about sound. First of all, I want to thank the Institute for inviting me. Such a great honor to be here, seeing some old and new friends. So it's really a great pleasure. Since we are talking about sound, I thought it could be an idea after lunch, where all we are in a kind of graveyard feeling in our stomach and brains. I thought it could be a good idea to start playing you some of the things that I'll be talking about. I could have been a rebel, and since I have 20 minutes, I could have played 20 minutes of sounds and say, okay, whatever you feel, whatever you think, that's it. But I'm a nice guy, so I'll do some explanation also. With your patience, I'll spend 3 minutes roughly on, thank you for the sound, but that's not the sound yet, on a curated playlist of songs and moments of fishing communities in the Mozambican island. I'm saying fishing communities because it's not only the male fishermen, it's also women who every morning or at the certain times of the day, they read the tides and they go into the ocean, diving most of the time to collect crabs, small mollusks and stuff like that. So, what we did as a team, we didn't put them in a studio and say, sing, we want to record you. We went after them, which was also a learning experience, making it technically challenging. But we wanted to keep the environment because we know that it's a very colonial manner where you put people to sing, where we can go home and listen to it as if you are performing in a hall or some sort of space. So, this is sound. You can listen to it. If you feel like closing your eyes and dozing off, please, you are welcome until we end up playing the songs. Luckily, the sound is the only thing that you can't block. Even if you close your eyes, still it will get through your ears. Can I?
Atenção, existe quem? Marcos tenta controlar o jogo. Há menos anos atrás, entrega quem? A Sani, a Anchita também é que está a controlar o jogo também. Existe quem? Mais outra vez quem? Chuia, rodopia para trás. Pode ser marca, alguma coisa atrás. Atenção, passa alguma coisa. Marca!
Aquí vamos. Vamos a trabajar. Vamos a trabajar. Pili, 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 macarapa, pili, 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 macarapa, pili, 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 macarapa, pili, 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 macarapa, pili, pili, Marakan Rupati sama mae, sama mae, sama 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 Marakan Rupati sama mae.
Agina guanu mongoma,
Wani mereke baba o, wani mereke baba o.
agina guanu mongoma, agina gukina remari.
Wani mereke baba o, wani mereke baba o.
Agina guanu mongoma, agina gukina remari.
Wani mereke baba o, wani mereke baba o.
Agina guanu mongoma, agina gukina murehafi.
Wani mereke baba o, wani mereke baba o.
Agina guanu mongoma, agina gukina kukumua.
Wani mereke baba o, wani mereke baba o.
Wahimerege babao,
Wani mereke baba o.
wahimerege babao.
Wani mereke baba o.
Okay, I stop for now with the sound. These are 4 different moments of recording. I worked with two group of each. Maybe Professor Machado knows Ilha de Moçambique, or I work with a group from Cabaceira, and which is one island, which is part of the group of the islands, and 2 groups on the main island, both with the same characteristics, male fishermen, and the 2 groups of women who every morning wake up to collect the seafood by the shore. So I won't bother you with the blah blah about the island, but I think what I wanted to tap on was this rich cultural tapestry of mixture of Africa, Arab, Portuguese, and many other nations. But also I noticed that the communities have a deep knowledge of the sea, which is really generational. But above all, I feel like this intersection of vernacular archives, cultural memories, and sound, it's also underexplored. We still very much into papers and pictures, which is fair, but there's other options also. So this research has mostly been focusing on preserving cultural memories through this vernacular sonic archives, because we don't have so many recordings of songs or of moments of sound. So it really becomes an issue to compare. Let me say that this has been provoked by another research that I did, which was more linked to the sonic environmental approaches, which was to look at the overall environment of the island and see how it is polluted. So more on the acoustic ecology approaches. But through that, there was this tiny little songs that were kept on popping. Then I thought, okay, maybe also that's something to look at. As I said, we want to tap into sonic hidden sources and also look at the work songs as living records of social, economic, environmental, and political shifts. It's interesting, some of you know that in Mozambique we are going through some real serious riots, and our fishermen were not allowed to do their thing in the main island. So I just received a quite exciting video where they went into boats and went to the sea and started singing from there. So this tells us a lot about what's the importance of the songs. These are working songs, of course, but from these working songs we can tap into quite a lot when it comes to the people in the island. Maybe you hear the song Pilivili, Pilivili, oh yeah, Wakenaka, Pilivili. You could hear that the singers sometimes were choking, because these are the ladies who sing Pilivili. So in between one dive and one verse, So, pili pili, oh yeah, oh, there's something, and they come up. So, that's why I said it was important for me to find them in their own environment, because they do this sort of apnea diving, just with the mask and harpoon, and they still use the song to tell things about their daily life. Here it's also to challenge the idea of official archives, which are written, very neat, with a lot of dust, but they are there. And also challenge the colonial and post-colonial written archives, which are the official archives, through looking at the oral traditions, work songs, and chants, and also to question research that is based only on written historical narratives. This is my method. I've been listening and recording work songs. I've done sound walks and sound talks. Maybe you won't find the term sound talks anywhere, but sound walks, you'll find it with Schaefer, a number of other scholars who are doing lots of things on sound. I present the idea of sound talks because when I sit with people, I want to talk about sounds and nothing else. Text and subtext analysis and deep listening to the chants of the subject matters. This is a day on my field work, going very early. Some of the songs you have listened to are inside the boat, starting with in the beginning with the motivational speaker, sometimes with a prayer. You have to know that most of the northern part of Mozambique is Islamic, so I didn't want to put the prayer because we never really cleared that. I felt like it was a very intimate moment, so I recorded, but without having their clearance, and there was no agreement within the group if we could, play it anywhere. So I kept that out of the research ethics and respect for them. So this is us very early in the morning. As you see, we are inside the boat. So our listening point is where we are. If I was in front of the boat, that will be my listening point. But I tried the best to be in a kind of 36 degrees position. But it's not easy because these people are working, and I have to do my best not to stay in their way. We have seen that, of course, it's possible through these songs and through this listening to get their lived experiences. So the songs will talk all the way from the hadiths or from the early arrival of Islam in the island to current subjects, like to tell George Bush to be aware of Bin Laden because Bin Laden is very strong, or now as a part of the problems we're having in Mozambique, to tell the leaders that yes, we've put you there, but if you mess up, we will take you out. And there's also this sort of critique, education, satire, because one of the songs, the last one that was played, Salamama, it means come and rest. But when you're asking a bit more of questions, it's not just to come and rest. It has many other possible meanings, even to some point of promiscuity, where a wife will sing to the husband like Salamama, come and do your duties as a man. So it's used in many contexts, even when there's a conflict. So we looked at this overall meaning of songs, and also at the very personal level, because some songs a partner would sing as a way of sending out a message to the person beside when not happy with anything. But of course it was possible also to access to some extent the environmental health studies through biophony, geophony, and technophony, because inspired by Sunil, I started trying to read the tides and to listen to the wind. And amazingly, all the people in the island, they can tell you if it's going to rain or not just by listening to the wind. I remember one day we were across the channel, and we had an alert that it was going to rain, because also we have to look at the weather. And one Nahota, an elderly person, said, "Nah, it's not going to rain." Yeah, I say, "Can you explain?" He said, "No, the wind is not coming from there, it's coming from that side. So it never rains." But we are victims of trusting modern technology. Anyway, we left. To our dismay, he was right. So there is a lot of knowledge but this maybe is something that I have to still go back and follow. There's a lot of embedded knowledge. Of course, we are saying that the marginalized voices have a space where they can talk to through these non-official archives. And we know that through sound, the memory of the island is being preserved. And it's a pity that we are not tapping a lot more into the sound, because going into the island, immediately you can see or you can hear lots of sonic intruders, like the crows and the motorbikes who are really polluting, and the normal human activity, which is also a critical challenge for the island, because you have to know that because of the civil war, the island now is overpopulated. So it means that there's lots of loss of habitat for all different species, inland, in the sea, because it's overpopulated. So we are thinking that through sound, we can go after the narratives to hear what people are saying, because some of the melodies are also very old, some of the melodies are very new, but at the same time, through sound, we can hear what people are saying in private. Through sound, we can hear what people are saying against the implanted political systems. Through sound, there's also an aspect of healing. There's the aspect of religion. So we are looking at it in that way. And I must say that it's almost done. And the challenge will always be how to present it, what will be the best medium to present it, because you can't present sound in a writing. But the moment also you put sound with images, it becomes video or something else. So these are the challenges. But with a friend and colleague of mine, we are putting together a sound installation where you can walk in and be part of the environment. We are resisting to put pictures, but I think at the end we'll have to allow pictures. But you're saying, okay, if you put pictures and you don't have the correct temperature, are you still in the same space? Because the Mozambique island is quite hot and humid. So if I have to listen, maybe I should be listening in as close to the environment. But of course, these are just provocations. I could play you a bit more of something just to close. Thank you.
Thank you, Rufus, for that wonderful presentation. So we're moving to our next presentation. It's by Arti Sirada. She is the founder, trustee, and head of communication, community, and resource governance program at Dakshin Foundation in India. Her talk is titled Trans-Regional Culture of Rule, Maritime Environmentalism of the Indian Ocean.
Hi, everyone. So I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me, the Africa Institute. I also would like to thank SSRC. I especially want to thank Rufus for that beautiful sound. I think that's very relaxing. And yeah, it's been an honor to really listen to all the conversations from yesterday onwards, and this morning has been fantastic. Yes, I'm with Dakshin Foundation. It's an NGO. It's based in India, in Bangalore, very far away from any coastal area. But it's an organization that's over a decade old. We work on conservation and development. That's how we see ourselves, as kind of located in that. We do a lot of we intervene. We also do research, largely over the weekends. And you know, this talk is super tentative. I have reworked the whole thing in my head too many times. But so I invite any comments and any suggestions that you might have on it. And I feel like it's already in conversation with the things I've heard yesterday and today. So it's sort of like with that stance that I'm standing here before you. Yeah. So let's see. You know, environmentalism itself it's sort of a subject that I identify with a lot, because I used to think of myself as an environmentalist. Then I've sort of just suspended that for a while. But it's a subject that's kind of difficult to theorize on, because well, the primary subject itself, the environment, seems to be changing quite a bit. And from what I understand of the theoretical work that's already happened on it, it's undergoing a fair amount of ontological and epistemological shifts. That said, it has benefited from the work of a lot of environmental historians, political scientists, political ecologists, sociologists, and so on. So as you can see from this quick slide, it has sort of undergone a number of shifts in terms of what might be the baselines for what really is environmentalism. Some scholars say that, okay, it has a sort of like a movement from the Northern American and the European sort of spaces to other parts of the world. So there's kind of like these diffusion kind of ideas around it. There's also and this kind of historiography locates environmentalism as a kind of human endeavor that's a very post-war kind of understanding, that's really associated with how people understand risk and how they understand environmental values. But other historians like Richard Grove traces the history of Western environmentalism way back to the 1500s, and to a time when there was more circulation, trade, and exchange, and so on with other groups, but also as a kind of like a colonial imperial imperative that was sort of fueled by the aesthetics of tropical Edens and their preservation. But with growing awareness of the conflicts that are around environmental values, you also see that there are different other new kinds of descriptions of environmentalism. There's the environmentalism of the poor that's associated with Juan Martinez Alier, and in India, Ramchandra Guha and Madhav Gadgil, the others also ascribe to this. There's also books written about the environmentalism of the rich, bourgeois environmentalism, which kind of centers class as a kind of organizing principle. There's subaltern environmentalism. There's Prakash's decolonial environmentalism, which I haven't read. But a bit of a favorite, personal favorite is this idea of a bad environmentalism, which is a kind of a humorous take on environmentalism. It's supposed to, lift the doom and gloom of environmentalists, which I think is a very important thing to contend with in today's time. So these are just some ideas that mark what the discourse around environmentalism is. As I'm trying to think of, is there something called maritime environmentalism? And there may be certain features that are common to all of these descriptions, and I won't read through it, just to say that there are certain common elements to what might constitute environmentalism, and we may want to, therefore, think about who are the actors, how have they emerged, what are the value systems, what are the contestations, and so on. What I, in this talk, would like to also point to is that there's a certain turn to a kind of reflexivity also, an impulse to examine one's own work, and that I think I'd like to do with the example of a small collaboration that was supported by the SSRC, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But before that, I just want to, I guess everybody here is really familiar with marine context, but in India, I just sort of want to show you what might be vignettes of, how people might think of environmental actions as, are these good actions, bad actions, and things like that. So I just want to share with you this. This was a photo that I took in January 2016 when I was making a film with some friends in coastal Tamil Nadu. Basically what happened was a group of 12 pilot whales, they beach quite often in this area. They had beached off this coast in southern Tamil Nadu. And in a matter of minutes, there were villagers from the fishing village of Manapad who had gathered around the whales. So, as you can see from these words, right, we couldn't help them, tears ran from their eyes, we felt terrible. This is text from interviews that were done by Janaki Lennon, who also reached that spot and spoke to people there. You can see that, in this vignette, you see that the communities were talking about themselves as, this is a natural impulse for us to have, that there is an emotional kind of connect, that people were, they had, these young boys and men had gotten into the waters. They had no plans of doing this. They just came to just see what was going on. But very soon were involved in a certain action, right? After a while, this was an exercise in futility. Almost all of the whales died. And very soon, I think some of the younger kids started jumping on the whales also and were dancing around till the older people said, hey, look, everyone's watching. Just get down, stop. We also had scientists from the CMFRI, the Central Marine Fisheries Research Institute, also coming. They took certain samples, shook their heads sadly, and went away. But very soon, the very next day onwards, there were theories about, what happened. Was this the result of an earthquake? Was this suicide? Was this because of military sonar activities? And in that one instance, it was not just about Manapad and its fishers kind of engaging in an act of care for these animals, but the reason I also think of this as maritime and not marine or fishing kind of environmentalism is that it draws in a whole network of chain of events, which could be like networks of actors, but also chains of causality. And so maybe we need to also think of, okay, what are these acts and who all need to be involved in something like this? And also draw attention to the fact that a certain story then emanates from this region. which then colors how to also think about actions like this. This is another vignette. I mean, this might be textbook environmentalism, an image, right, of people against a powerful behemoth like the state. In this instance, this is the villagers around the nuclear power plant of Kudankulam, also in Tamil Nadu. All of them have gotten into the water and they're protesting against this nuclear power plant. It looks like, this is another instance for me of a kind of maritime environmentalism, because it's not just about your own backyard. It is about energy sources that come from elsewhere. There's a whole chain of causal events here. But this is also, it's not for us to automatically also take into account that, if it is a fishing community, that you will always see environmental action like this. For every action like this, there are scores that go uncontested, and therefore it is not an essential quality of a maritime community to protest. Sometimes you need an alliance of certain set of actors for something like this to emerge. And therefore, when we think about maritime environmentalism, or just environmentalism in general, we might want to think about, okay, what made this happen? There's another image here, and this is the sort of image that usually, incenses conservation organizations, because they tend to see this as an image of a small-scale fishing community going rogue, in the sense of this is not what they were meant to do. They were meant to be guardians of the environment. What is going on here? So I also, in my own practice, have tried to understand what's happening here. So this is fisher members of the Paravar community, which is a historical pearl diving community. And their pearl diving and chunk diving has stopped over the years. But they are also a community that has been working as labor on shipping vessels and so on. And this is just in one village where they've learned scuba, and they've decided to go on hookah diving as an occupation for themselves. And they argue that this is a legitimate environmental relation for them to have against others who think that that is not the case. Okay, so I'm just saying that, how then do we think about communities like this who will, in the face of barotrauma, in the face of other kinds of risks of doing this kind of work, also see that, hey, listen, you have to allow us to do it, because this is our expression of modernity, dignity of our own, people, caring for our community, and having some relationship with these spaces. These are also the communities that sometimes have protested against other activities in the vicinity, such as the smelter plant and other larger scale development projects. So for me, it's a question of, is this sort of like a subaltern expression of environmental relation and risk assessment, or is it just like fishers that have gone rogue? Similar cases you see across the Indian coastline, where this is a picture of ring seine fishing. Ring seine fishing is, if you're familiar with purse seine fishing, it's a form of fisheries which the small-scale fishing communities of India have now started taking on. It's spread like wildfire everywhere. But the communities have taken this up despite the fact that it's considered to be somewhat environmentally destructive. But they point to the fact that they themselves had tried to stop this, but they found no allies from either the state or from any other departments or the other fisher associations, and decided that their environmental action was then to adopt ring seine fisheries. And they do that by involving smaller scale fishing communities. If turtles get trapped in them, they'll remove the turtles out. So, it just makes you think, okay, how do you make sense of this kind of event also that's happening across the Indian subcontinent? And finally, I mean, like, there's another vignette here, which I just want to share, which is from one of the stories that, that we had gathered about fishing communities, you know, who to look at as an environmental actor. So this is a picture, it's a half picture of a fisherman who, his entire village migrates, and they all work in the cement, like basically in the construction industry, or they're working around cement bags and cement industries and so on. But actually building our great Indian Ocean cities, which are meant, you know, which people discuss as one of the most polluting sources of the Indian Ocean in terms of climate and so on. So when the small scale, so in a sense, in an embodied way, this person is also signaling a kind of environmental crisis. But how do you then, is this a source of environmentalism for us? And what do we do with it, those of us who want to then intervene and influence using these kind of events around us? So some questions just came to mind. I warned you, this is not going to be terribly coherent. But I'm just wondering if space matters at all. Or are some of these features just cross-cutting across any kind of environmentalism? You know, what might actually like make for a Indian Ocean kind of maritime environmentalism? Does that make sense to talk about? And if so, what might be the conditions that some of us want to consciously say, hey, these are conditions for Indian Ocean maritime environmentalism, because, you know, maybe it's more democratic. By democratic, we mean X, Y, Z, and so on. So, yes, at heart, it appears that environmentalism means that there's a bunch of people, there's a bunch of actions, some values, usually not an individual action, it's usually a collaborative action, and some sense of a strained set of relations. What the historiography shows is that, you know, there's an operation of multiple kinds of structures of rule. And these might not only be the top-down legal systems, although they are hugely influential, but you might also have like bottom-up ways of relating and structuring relations. I guess some of the influential or the inspiring ideas for me is that some problems may look like proximate problems, but we may want to challenge ourselves to actually see what are like longer chains of association, what causes a particular problem at a site, when we talk about them as a problem that maritime environmentalism has to solve. So when I turn to other forms of scholarship about what might, you know, be a kind of an ethic towards nature, Shivaraman has a sort of typology of what he thinks is ethics of nature in South Asia. This is a slightly old paper, but the thing that I like about this paper is that, you know, he draws attention to the fact that telling of stories is a key part of educating us about virtues, and I want to just harness this idea that for environmental action, it is necessary to tell stories, and maybe to tell stories with responsibility. Also, just to say that while we speak of cultures of law, I think when in today's environmentalism, you kind of can't look at, this is not a space where the values are sort of just emanating from one source. There is a very dominant place for formal law, and often we find ourselves as environmentalists somewhat unwittingly aiding in actually giving it way more power than it ought to have. So how much time do I have? 5 minutes. Okay. So I just want to draw attention to what happens when you look at formal law as structuring environmentalism. You have a sort of flattening of what these oceanic spaces are, and I think everybody in this room understands that. This is just an example of, in the Indian context, the coastal regulation laws have been very, very dynamically used by a large number of people. It's almost an accident that so many people are so animated by this particular law. But this law actually flattens the coast out in this way. What a number of us tried to do as environmentalists is to kind of add layers to what this law does. So you add layers in terms of spatially how these maps ought to look like. You translate this. You actually do a whole lot of outreach. So, and then you have communities and you have people who are actually somewhat absent from the space of professional environmentalism to come in and hold their own in this space. And when you have different people who have sort of like not actually had a say at all in marine environmentalism, such as women from fishing communities, with actually engaging with formal law, you see that they want to actually highlight very different visions of what the coast looks like. So what they see as valuable spaces and objects on the coast looks very different from what you would normally see in environmental legislation. Similarly, you have, again, wildlife laws that just put animals on schedules and areas that are protected. But through a range of environmental actions and storytelling activities, you have the opportunity to produce different values. But what's important is also that not just the end product of is there a book or a film, but what happens as the process of producing that kind of object. That is really valuable for me. So I think I'll skip a couple of these things and just share with you what our collaboratory did as an example. The Southern Collective was set up at the time of COVID with support from SSRC. It was meant to be basically it invited scholars who were environmentalists, who were anthropologists, sociologists, to come together and continue to do social science research, but we use this as an opportunity to do slightly better storytelling without knowing whether we would actually get out into the field. So it's very much a digital sort of archive. Of course, it had a number of people be a part of it. We had about 18 partners from across 6 countries, and anthropologists and social scientists do what they do, which is to write. But aside from writing, there was also 2 projects which involved non-academics, practitioners, NGOs, students, and so on. And this is a glimpse of a project called Sea Lexicon. It's led by Lakshmi Pradeep, who herself was doing a PhD, but her PhD was based in the Lakshadweep Islands. And what she's been able to do is build a small group of storytellers who are all island-based young people to start documenting stories about different elements of their space. And this grew from actually wanting to make a lexicon only of the Jesseri language to being a lexicon of the Indian Ocean, such that we would be able to look at what each of these objects meant across the Indian Ocean. This is another example of Dr. Shayan Dey's work, and most of this work is done in collaboration between either an anthropologist, some form of a scholar, with other interlocutors who produce these stories together. So these might be ways in which we may also see the circulation of certain objects and their values associated with it. And what's really important is the back end of the production, much more than the actual story that is there, because that has taken a lot of time to put together. And these are the things that actually invest individuals in their own heritage and in their own surroundings. The other example is that of Migration Diaries. I think we were inspired by the figure of migrants, as well as like the deep knowledge of the crisis on the east coast of India as far as fisheries is concerned, and we wanted to see how we could collaborate with migrants themselves. So Migration Diaries is a curation of stories which are produced by migrant workers in collaboration with other members of the fishing community itself, where they tell the stories together. They write it in their local languages, but it also gets translated in English just for the purpose of us sharing these stories across the board. We've tried to see how these might inform our ideas about what constitutes an environmental crisis by giving it certain tags. But once again, the process of creating this, the backstage of this work, is far more important in actually building a kind of maritime ethic. So just as a sort of reflection between a few of us, when we look at what we were trying to do, we are trying to capture, I think, a sense of the environment which is not located in formal law or in formal discourse about the environment. We're also trying to sort of offer a space collaboratively, not speak for someone else, but offer a space where people who definitely want to speak about their own environments have a chance to actually sort of realize their values. And I think that, you know, in the act of even producing these kind of narratives, you have a possibility to build a whole bunch of alliances. But you also, by generating stories like this about a space, you kind of have an opportunity to do something a little more creative and get away from what I feel is the David Goliath kind of portrayal of environmentalism, where small actions are kind of not valued. I see it more as these sort of actions of storytelling invest people in a way more positive way than, you know, the sort of objective area of either law or environmental training and so on. I'd like to just end with thanking all my colleagues and all of you who bear with me for these super sketchy ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Arti. Now we are going to move to the next presentation by Sunil Santa, who is the Dean of Academic Affairs and Chairperson of Center for Livelihood and Social Innovation at Tata Institute of Social Sciences in India. His talk is titled Drying Fish as an Act of Being and Becoming. The floor is yours.
So, good afternoon all, and thank you for giving this opportunity to present my initial thoughts of this topic. So, the second part of the title is more important than the first, the diffractive reading on nature culture entanglements. And I should say that when you browse through the abstract, you will not see what I am presenting today, there is any connection between what I wrote in the abstract and to the paper, how it evolved. When the call came and the invite came that I have that if I could contribute, and the initial thought was the title came up, and I thought that I will look at Kerala, the dry fisheries in Kerala, and move from Kerala to Mumbai, and from Mumbai to, because the Africa Research Institute was inviting it, I thought let me also explore dried fisheries in Africa. So that is the way I wrote the abstract. But data has its own agency to drive the researcher towards its own course, and that is how I got stuck within Mumbai, and then I moved towards Gujarat, or in the process of moving towards Gujarat. So the outline of my presentation today is like this. I just briefly introduce on the nature of dried fish-based livelihoods, largely in India and Mumbai. And I am locating my paper as a very shallow critique of political economy and political ecology arguments on, and In place of that, can we move towards an alternative theoretical perspective, perhaps drawing insights from agential realism by Karen Barad, or other post-humanist works like what Anna Singh and others have explored. To place my points and perspectives, I take the lived experiences of two, I could not say whether they are exactly the lived experiences, I'd say the life stories of the Bombay duck as well as the Kohli fisherwomen, and trying to locate the human, non-human entanglements. And in that process, whom are we discovering? Whose life are we discovering? This is the journey that I am going to take here. And in this process of my becoming, I invite you also to become part of the story. So, dried fish-based livelihoods, largely if you see the literature, all aquatic animals that are referred in terms of sun-dried, salted, fermented and smoked, they come under this category of dried fish. But in Mumbai, especially in my field site, largely we see sun-drying. And among some of the fisher folk, we see that even salting is a common practice. Now, largely if you see the whole, around 99% of the people involved in the dried fish industry is largely women from traditional fishing communities, and in Mumbai they are the Kohli community. And we could say that it is largely a strategy of livelihood diversification, and literature also shows that in the context of climate change, etc., there are forms of adaptation, etc., which I don't agree necessarily to, because before we coining the term adaptation itself, this has been a strategy of these people. One important aspect of this drying fish and selling dried fish and cooking and eating dried fish is that it is very much entangled to one's own culture, identity and everyday life struggles. If you see this photograph of this fish called moshi, I am sorry that I am not sure about which species in English language we will talk about this. It looks sometimes like a baby shark to me. But the moshi, you see that every day when the fisherwomen open their stalls, you will find that they are placing a garland or a flower as a mark of respect and a ritual sanctity to this fish, and then they enter into their livelihood. So these are the kind of entanglements you could see as part of a ritual in their everyday life. But what I want to share here today is the stories of the Kohli women as well as the Bombay duck. Both are contesting who are the original inhabitants of Mumbai. The literature shows that the Kohli fishing communities are the original inhabitants. The Fish and Fisheries journal, if you see, and all the scientists who study the Bombay duck, they say that the original inhabitant of the Mumbai coast, you will find the Bombay duck. But what has happened to the Kohli community in the context of modernization of fisheries and also urban development and hyper-capitalism today, you could see that the traditional occupation, which were based on boats and traditional fishing gears, have given way to more mechanized trawl fisheries and purse seine fisheries, etc. And real estate development and other forms of changes happening along the coast, like the Coastal Corridor Project, etc. You find that the Kohli community are dispossessed and displaced and dispossessed from their oceans, from their coast, from the fish that they had access to, and the drying yards as well as the market spaces where they sell and buy fish. In contesting these developments over a period of time since the last 2 decades, we could see that the Kohli women have resisted such developments and such interventions, and they were able to come together, and their movement was very strong enough to resist many of these encroachments, etc. And one such case which I am presenting to you today is the Marol dry fish market. Here I should say that there are various literature that has already delved into this fisheries movement, this fish workers movement. So it's not something that it is very new that I am going to present in front of you. On the other hand, if you look at the Bombay duck, they reveal various cross-cultural relations in terms of colonial and post-colonial histories. There are various diverse cuisines from the Parsi community to the Kohli community to the so-called Mumbaikars, etc. How the various, if you go and put search of a bombil or a Bombay duck or a bumla recipe, you will get more than 100 recipes, and they are all connected to certain ethnic traditions as well. Bombay duck has found way into the form of different forms of art, literature, and other elements of culture. However, just like the Koli community, due to the oceanic uncertainties caused largely due to overfishing, ocean warming, pollution, and climate change, we could say the Bombay duck has moved away from the Mumbai coast. And since 2017-18, the stock of Bombay duck in the Mumbai coast has been very less. We could see that is more available along the Gujarat coast. Now, has the Bombay duck also expressed its form of resistance, saying that I am saying bye to Mumbai because of the overpollution, because of the development trajectories that you are following? I am saying bye-bye to Mumbai and moving towards Gujarat, but even Gujarat is something almost in the same trajectory. So within these two aspects, I am then looking at my own experiences. From 2012, I have been studying fisheries in Mumbai, along with my PhD scholars and fieldwork students in social work, etc. So in 2012, I focused on two Koli Vadas, or the fishing villages, Versova and Mat, then Gorai, and then the fish markets of Mumbai, and finally the women's solidarity movements in Mumbai, largely connected to fisheries. But what I have been seeing this, and the 2022 project was largely supported by SSRC during that time, where Dr. Almaz and others were part of the team. So, but what was happening to me when I look at this is that following a traditional political economy or a political ecology approach, it was an abrupt end for me. I was not getting a full meaning out of what I am doing. Largely a linear discourse of modernization and capitalism. And Aarti rightly brought out the issues of migrant workers. And but what is the discourse happening within Mumbai and among the indigenous fishing communities here is that migrant workers are a threat to them. And that discourse gets reinforced in the form of binaries in everyday practice, like us versus them, women versus men, fresh fish versus dry fish, or ethical practice versus unethical practices. So, is there any alternative explanation to this? Can we go beyond political ecology and political economy discourses? And that is where I am presenting this approach. Can we do a diffractive reading of the Bombay duck, and what alternative narrative does it give us? Let's look into it. So, Bombay duck is called as Bombil in Mumbai and Bumla in Gujarat. So, the Bombay duck is a lizard fish, and it is a seasonal marine fish largely found along the coast of Asia, East Africa, Indonesia and China. And in India, you find largely within Mumbai and Gujarat coast. And if you see the pictures here from a Bombay duck, you could see on the bottom right, you see the way it is being dried in the scaffoldings. One of the recipes and the dish in which the Bombay duck is made, but also Bombay duck is one of the key characters in many of the fictions that has come. Bombay duck is not a fish, and in a spy thriller also Bombay duck is there. There is also a book called Bombay Duck. So there are various ways the Bombay duck has captured the imaginations of people. Now this Bombay duck is a very soft fish, and there is a myth around this. Along when you go to the Koli community, they say that when Lord Ram was building the Ram Setu or the Adams Bridge, he asked the support of all the oceanic beings. So all the oceanic beings said that yes, we will help you build the bridge, but except the Bombay duck. So Ram got angry and he took the Bombay duck, squeezed it and threw it from there, from the Ram Setu. And the fish came and fell into the Mumbai, Gujarat coast. And that is why it is very soft. And but scientifically, the scientists say that since 1958 there are studies which shows that actually this is a deep sea fish, and that is why it has all the characteristics of that. And they get into seasonal migration during the spawning time, and that is especially when there is a temperature change, especially when the monsoon set in, and there is a change in salinity. Why it is not there in other part of the coast is because it requires the presence of estuaries, the islands and monsoons together for the Bombay duck to spawn and breed. And they breed along the coast, and then they again go back to the deep sea. But one more important aspect is they follow their prey, that is the prawns, the pinoid prawns, and that is where they try to follow them. Now, what's in a name? How did the Bombay duck, the fish, get the name of a duck? So, there are various explanations, and this is also shows the agency of the fish in different spaces. So, here you see that one of the common explanation when you browse Google and other sites is that you will find that there was this train called Bombay Mail, which is one of the part of the Imperial Railways, and when it used to move from start from Mumbai to Kolkata, and the train was called as Bombay Dak. And along with the post and mails and everything, the fish also used to be transported in that. And it used to give such a pungent foul smell, and people used to know that the train is coming because of that. And that is how the Bombay Dak, mail means in Hindi it was Bombay Dak, and then later on Bombay Dak became Bombay Duck. There is another popular story in Calcutta which says that it was Robert Clive who gave the name Bombay Duck because of the pungent smell, because it used to smell like the Bombay Mail. Yet, if you look at the journal notes and queries, there are wonderful explanations and arguments and counter-arguments going on, and one of the popular one is that one author says that his grandfather was a sailor, was the captain of a ship, and the sailors were from the Dangri port, and the sailors in those ships used to wear what is called the Dangri attire. And if you see, there is a resemblance between the Dangri khakis and the way the Bombay duck is being dried. They look similar in both in texture and fashion. So that is how it got its name. That is another explanation. Yet another explanation which I don't see much of correlation is that it says that it derived from the Telugu name called, it is called some kuka. Kuka is, in a way, it is called a fierce dog. And why? Because of the predatory characteristics. It's very fierce in its predatory characteristics, and that is also some way the name has been ascribed to. Whatever said and done about the name, today it is a brand name. Be it connected with fish or fisheries or not, they have Bombay Duck, which I think is an event management company. But in London, Bombay Duck is one of the core component of the recipes and the dish available in Indian restaurants. And in 1997, August 14, the eve of Indian Independence Day celebrations, the European Commission actually banned the import of Bombay Duck, not only from India, from Bangladesh and even Madagascar, saying that it is unhygienic. Interestingly, from then, people used to write in the newspapers, the British journalists used to write, and after 10 years of continuous protest and everything, the ban was revoked. And so today it is available in the restaurants in London. In Mumbai, they are part and parcel of the nostalgic recipes of the Parsi community, and every Parsi restaurant you go, you will find different varieties of the Bombay Duck, not only in the restaurants, in their homes as well. Now coming to the actual process in which they are caught, around 5 to 10% of the bombil is actually sold fresh, as you see in the fish stalls here. And so these are the Bombay ducks. And the remaining is dried. So here you find the prey of the Bombay duck. The prawns are left for drying. And these empty scaffoldings, I want you to remember this, how the scaffoldings here are in both these places, and what is the quantity of Bombay ducks hung in these poles. Because this, I will come to it later. But this is the way it is being dried. And one of the important aspects is when I talk about entanglements, the Bombay duck is also dried by interlocking two Bombay ducks. The necks of the two Bombay ducks will be interlocked, and then they will be hung over the ropes. So that is how they are dried, the dried Bombay duck. And finally, so it takes 2 to 3 days to completely, if there is a good sunny day, 2 to 3 days to dry Bombay duck. And then within 8 days, if you are selling it, you get a good price. After that, the moisture gets absorbed, and then the dried fish is not acceptable, the quality declines. So you see the Bombay duck in the market. Now, this is a very important thing. I didn't have any part in this particular story. This was done by the Goethe Institute, and there were curators from Germany and Europe who played a part in this. But what has happened here is that when I was reviewing the literature and watching some videos, the Koli community, in association with these curators, they mummified the Bombay duck. You could see on the right side the mummies of the Bombay duck, which was presented in front of the Historical Museum, saying that both the Koli community and the Bombay duck have an existential crisis today, and we have to mummify it for conservation and preservation. So now coming to the market spaces, what was a customary intergenerational space where the sitting space for the market for the Koli women from a grandmother to the mother to the daughter has come, today it is being encroached in a way by the municipal corporation, real estate, builders, etc. And it is in this context women have come together resisting these spaces. So this is the Marol fish market. One side of the Marol fish market you see different subcaste of Koli community sitting and selling, and this is behind where they are cleaning some of the dry fish. And one of the key aspects which even Aarti was presenting, and I would say that environmentalism largely in marine environmentalism is shaped by caring solidarity. The ethics of care perspective largely shapes the everyday justice, which is missing in other environmentalisms what we see. So now these are some of the leaders of this movement who their aspect is they embed their indigenous identity and ethnic voices with the religious or the rituals like connecting to the oceans. And you can see that in the hand of the leader is a goddess that they have made for one particular ceremony. And they take the goddess along with that and wear ethnic saris. They have brought the boat and kept in the terrace saying that this is the symbol of our life, nobody can occupy our market spaces, etc. And behind you could also see the graphics of the Koli women and their resistance. Now, what happened to this Marol fish market is that there is a lot of literature, and even in the previous SSRC presentations, I have presented this story that it was a success and the women were able to resist the municipal corporation, and today it is a self-governed market space where the government has also recognized the role of this particular organization. But what was a question that I want to bring it here is that as we were going with the field work, once we go into the membership levels and talk to the everyday members of these organizations, there is some kind of a murmuring and disagreement that happens. And two important points. One is that the women, the ordinary Koli women who are just participants of the movement, they were upset that one is the movement agreed to change the working day of the market from Friday to Thursday for the men traders, the migrant men traders who come to supply the wholesale fish. So why did they change that? For us, Fridays were comfortable. Why did they change that? This is the kind of a question that comes. Second is that the leaders of the movement also gave spaces for the migrant women called the Kathiawadi women who come to sell dried fish. So in the last four decades, if you see, the Kathiawadi women used to come and work as laborers in the drying yard of the fishing villages in Mumbai. And slowly now they are given spaces to sell their own fish. Now this is something that they say, why are they being given a space? This is our customary space. So then the leaders argue back saying that they are also women. So they need to, their livelihood is something that we have to take care of. But then the counter argument is they follow unethical practices. What are the unethical practices? Very interestingly, if you see that the measurement, while the Koli women sell in heap, the Kathiawadi women sell in weighing scales, the balance, the weighing scale. And what they do, the argument is that they sprinkle water over the dried fish, so the weight increases. So they say, we don't do that. Second is that the Mumbai Bombay duck is big, while the Kathiawadi women who bring the Bombay duck, that is a smaller one. So ours is bigger one. The next one is more important. We don't go for door-to-door selling fish. Only the migrant women go to door-to-door selling fish. They say, this is a very powerful statement, they say, fish in water, if it has to be healthy, it has to move. Fish on the land, if it has to be healthy, it has to stay at one place. You shouldn't take it from one place to another. So the notion of mobility when it changes. So the conventional political ecology approaches did not give me an answer. So that is where we, using Karen Barrett's approach, we started rereading the data, returning to the data. And when we went there, we realized that in one of the transcript, they say, we buy the Bombay duck from the Kathiawadi women. These days, there is no Bombay duck, so we buy the Bombay duck from the Kathiawadi women. We started following the Bombay duck like that, and we reached Jafrabad. And so our fieldwork at Jafrabad has to still begin. So what is the literature largely from the interviews in Mumbai and some of the reviews online. So we followed the Bombay duck till Jafrabad, and what we realized in Gujarat, so from here, we moved from here and we realized that the Bombay duck is coming from Jafrabad these days to Mumbai. And who are the suppliers? The suppliers and the custodians of this Bombay duck are the Kathiawadi women. And they say that the Bombay duck is indigenous to them and not Mumbai. And see, you can see this in Kathiawad, in Jafrabad. They say they are the indigenous fishing communities. You see the richness of the Bombay duck in their scaffoldings compared with what you saw in Mumbai. How they process it, how they pack it and bring to Mumbai on Thursdays. Now, to conclude my presentation here, a diffractive approach and a posthumanist approach of following the Bombay duck actually gave a different narrative of the missing people that Bradotti talks about. We need to also look at the missing people in city spaces, and they were the Kathiawadi women. All of them are entangled along with the Bombay duck, be it the Koli women or the women from Gujarat, performing an interaction, and there is a lot of scope for looking at future possibilities. Now, what is happening here is there is a kind of fluidity. What yesterday Anna Singh's and her colleagues' presentation also showed. The fluidity of the ocean, the fluidity of the fish migrating largely from Mumbai to Gujarat, the fluidity of migration from Gujarat of the Kathiawadi men and women to Mumbai. And this fluid entanglement is what we should be clear of, because whenever we are talking about climate change adaptation, ocean warming, etc., we have a very rigid and static understanding of what adaptation models has to be. But when you have such a very entangled, fluid kind of a dynamic relationship between fish and different types of humans, then I think that dynamic nature has to be captured well enough when we look at climate change adaptation. So, to conclude, I would also just read it out. The Bombay duck has its own performativity and history of entanglement with the oceans, land, water, sun, the British, the Parsis, the Kolis, Mumbaikars, Kathiawadis, and so on. The Kolis have their own, and both of them are entangled at different junctures of time and space, creating differential patterns or impacts. Future research can replace the Bombay duck with the goldfish, Singada, or any of these dried fish varieties, or we can take them together rather than individually. Each of them will exhibit their agency and their own kinds of entanglements and future possibilities of cooperation and living together. So, entangled together are my other co-authors, my PhD scholars and master's students. Thank you.
We'll ask you all to come at the front for Q&A. Okay. Is there anyone who would like to ask questions, make comment? Okay.
Thank you so much all for the presentations. I have one question related to this dry fish. I'm just wondering if those people have any beliefs or perspectives towards this species. So do they have any beliefs or any perspective towards this species, or they don't have this kind of beliefs? That's my question. My second question is that, do they have any festival? For example, here in UAE, they have what they call Mehrajan Dubb al-Husn, which is fishing festival. In Nigeria also, we have that big festival, which is always taking place in Kaduna State, I think. So I'm just wondering if you have tried to figure out if there is any festival and what's the connection between these festivals happening around the Indian Ocean. Thank you so much.
Would you? Oh, okay, so yeah, here.
Thank you for this very fascinating panel and taking us to the beach and to the, to the music and all of that. So my question / comments is for Aarti. Continuing. There's an anthropologist at Cornell his name is Paul Nadasti, and for about 3 decades he's been working with indigenous nation, and he's almost like an honorary member of it's a long-term research program. And the argument that he has made is that Western environmentalism is founded on a notion of a fundamental disconnect between nature and society. And the Western environmentalists, for them, there's a binary, that there's a non-environmentalist people who don't care about the environment, and there are environmentalists who care about the environment in the sense that the Western environmentalist understands, right? You drive to the national park and all that stuff. And his argument is that indigenous environmentalism, as it has been popularly talked about within Western environmental circles by WWF and IUCN and so forth, is an attempt to sort of appropriate elements of indigenous environmentalism and slap it onto that spectrum of Western binary of environmental, non-environmental. And he says it's actually futile to fight about where indigenous environmentalism belongs in this spectrum, because the indigenous environmentalism is based on material engagement with, that are closely entangled with social, economic, utility and, philosophy and so forth. And I wonder if you, how would you react to that argument in the context of the way you're trying to make sense of these different arguments about environmentalism?
Thank you very much for the very nice presentations. I have several questions. One is directed to Rufusi. We have many beings in the Mozambique island, but you have focused on the sounds of the people. What about the sounds of other beings, like the fish, and whether such sounds could also convey different messages regarding the current state of the ocean or the island? To Aarti, you're doing an amazing job. You are doing an amazing job, especially documenting the stories and working with this community. My question is, you said that such kind of communities need also some kind of alliances, people to work with. Have you become one of them, the alliances to the fishermen, and what difference has it made? And also, if you could also expand on you had written David and Goliath portrayal, how is it related to the issues of environmental in that kind of community? You have said in your presentation, you have a story of David and Goliath portrayal. So how is that related to the current state of your environment action? Sunil, you have found the dry fish, and I like that story. Thank you.
I think you can.
So he has left. So, still I could answer, right? So who asked the question has got a phone call. So I think by the time you could answer
We'll
and then.
ask any other. Okay, I'll leave the festival question to you to deal with. To Prakash, yeah. I mean, of course, Indians may, like, who is indigenous is still like, especially with coastal communities. First of all, there's so much diversity between coastal marine fishing communities that they're not one homogeneous group. And like in Sunil's story, there's contestation between them in terms of value and worldviews. So this is there for sure. But I think, yes, perhaps the Western view of looking at nature and culture as separate, I mean, that is something that all of us are schooled in. I was schooled in that view, and I use environmental law a great deal as a way of trying to negotiate these balances. But I understand how difficult, I mean, how that language is limiting. And of course, there's a lot of environmental, so-called environmental actions, including scientific work and so on, that tries to very instrumentally look at indigenous, traditional knowledge, local ecological knowledge, and try and fit it into wherever it works. And I think that's a kind of, that is a decision that those particular actors have taken, saying that if we have to make biodiversity conservation, if biodiversity conservation has to take place, and if people have to be involved, they have to make these biodiversity registers. It has to be recorded in a format and form that makes sense to a wider set of actors. So I'm just thinking that the practice of environmentalism is also a practice of communication and negotiation. So unless we're looking at groups like the Centennialies or, certain kind of groups who actually have no contact, or there's a sort of understanding that there should be no contact, communities don't seem to have the choice but to engage with some of these dominant narratives. To the extent that those of us who are mediators can play that role a little more responsibly, then that's good. But by themselves, with the Sami or with the indigenous groups of certain parts of the world, I think there is a negotiated decision to sort of leave, to stay off a little bit. That we don't have in India, and we certainly don't have it with marine fishing communities who are seen as backward and need to be developed. So.
Yeah. So the question is that with respect to this particular fish, the kind of a belief system that the community have, it will be not correct from my side if I only isolate the fish from all their more comprehensive rituals and belief systems. But what I have noticed is that in their literature, they say that just like the waves of the sea, they involve in an ethnic dance, the Koli dance. And they say we dance like the waves. And why are we dancing like the waves? Because either the father or the husband is going to go in the boat to bring home the Bombay duck. Okay, and it's a very beautiful dance that you could see, and some of them are very spontaneous. The lyrics are very spontaneous. Rufus will be actually interested to actually capture those. Now, apart from that, there are a lot of belief systems connected to the ocean and the oceanic beings. And it is also manifested in terms of rituals during, say, the Narsali Purnima, where they offer the coconut to the sea, coconut grains, etc., to the sea, saying that may the sea be calm for the next 1 year and give us enough of wealth and keep our men safe. So these kinds of belief systems and rituals are there. But one of the important aspects that we need to do, there's a lot of ethnographic writings on the belief systems and rituals that are followed by indigenous fishing communities. But somewhere when we are facing issues like oceanic warming, coastal erosion, fish scarcity, and etc., we also need to move beyond the symbolic nature of all these rituals and try to see who are being excluded and who are being included in this. And what are the other stories? What are the alternative worldviews? Otherwise, we might interpret those rituals also. So that is somewhere we need to move beyond. That is where I would stand.
I'd just like to add one thing, that in places like in India, there are many taboos against also the consumption of marine fish by hinterland communities who consider freshwater fish to be of a higher hierarchy and status and things like that. So even as an act of environmentalism, there have been some recent festivals of, actually women coming, occupying space, cooking, eating, inviting people to eat, inviting government officials to come and eat their food, things like that. So these are also some new forms of celebrating fishing cultures, which is a political act, very, very overt sort of form of environmentalism as well.
Yeah, thank you. Try to answer. Well, I look at this work as a series of papers. The first one, which was published, is called Soundscapes of Homohippity, and I think was through a collaboration with Professor Isabel Hofmeyer, and it was published, I don't remember actually the name of the journal, but this first paper looked at the island as a whole, like in a more broad vision, listening to the island as a whole space. That's where I discussed mostly how polluted it is, what are the sonic intruders, what sounds people are missing. When I do my sound talks, I ask people like, okay, is there any sound that currently is annoying you? I asked in the previous part of the research, and people said, yeah, we hate the motorbikes, we hate the crows, and a number of other sounds that people hated. And there were sounds that people were missing. The bicycles, which were less noisy, and they had the small bell, like ring, ring, which was less annoying. And also people would say there's been changes in the whole geophony of the island. But it was through this first overall listening that I said, I need to listen to people. I need to listen to people's narratives, to people's stories, through their musicality, through their sonic approaches. That's why now we are on the second part. Actually, what you're asking is what has already started as a process for the third part, which is I would say, underwater acoustic ecology. That's very expensive, so no funding yet. That's very complicated but still I have started the process of doing underwater recordings. But the analysis, it's really complex. The area we are talking about, it's a place where I'm not yet listening to the octopus as you asked, but I'm listening to whales. Because the area we are talking about is a place where whales comes for nesting, and it's a whaling wash station. So what you will hear as sounds, it is amazing. And remember, underwater the sound travels even further, which means you could be listening to a sound that is, I don't know how many kilometers. There's been records of sounds that have traveled close to 1,000 miles underwater, because underwater the sound doesn't really get lost. But listening to sounds underwater, it's a heck of a mission, because I don't live underwater. So normally I have to look for databases and try to relate to. So it's mostly a mechanical thing. But I have started because I've understood that it's not like when you're going on a normal field work in land where you talk to people and you have references. Underwater, I have no references. So that maybe I might even die without finishing that part of the research.
Okay, so let's go for the second round of questions. Yes. You have to. Okay, so you still have to.
That I didn't answer his question. Yeah. Do I see myself as in alliance? Most definitely do. we are an organization that is sort of set up to do this work. Yes, and we do everything by the... Okay, thank you, cameras. Yeah, so we're an organization that's meant to do this sort of work, working in alliance with fishing communities, supporting them and so on. So yeah, we do that. I mean, that's, so we do all of this stuff somewhat consciously and very deliberately, and hence all the confusion and the questions, right? Like what is one doing? How does one deal with the conflict within communities? You see the ugly side of everybody, including your own colleagues and, you know, and people within an alliance. And that's both the beauty as well as the pain of doing this kind of work. So, okay, more outside.
Thank you for your fascinating talks, and they follow nicely from the doom and gloom of Prakash's last talk yesterday. But in it, he also sort of suggested that one needs to look at social movements, right, and at what people are doing in order to sort of figure out next moves and so on. So as scholars who actually work with people, because what I heard from the talks, as Arthi just said, is there is confusion, right, in the current moment as power is increasingly unavailable to ordinary actors, right? Where if you want to block a port, you could try, but even in a communist state like Kerala, capital sort of wins the day, especially when capital allies with a powerful state like the Modi Raj, as I like to think of India today. So, is there something that you can offer by way of countering the gloom and doom of Prakash's talk? Another question? I do have an add-on to this still so that you can take it on board. Okay.
I think a big challenge with us academics is that we have such unlimited freedoms to be able to intellectualize in so many different ways that it's often very difficult to sort of, mediate between our competing arguments. But one way of doing this would be to sort of, catch hold of the same argument from same people and see over time what has happened, right? So an example would be in the middle of COVID, when we had that sort of virtual sense of solidarity and, enlightenment. It did turn out to be virtual enlightenment, right? That, after the COVID, none of the things that many of us expected that, now we see the world in a new light and maybe we will be forced to sort of, collaborate and stand in solidarity. So in that sense, the present moment is actually can also be seen as a moment of clarity, right? From that sort of longer term perspective. So anyway, I just wanted to sort of say, to see how you think about the role of the people's movement within this broader, larger political economy. So.
Rosa, okay.
Thanks. I think I'll take a middle ground. Arti, I was fascinated by one of your first slides where you talked about the possibility of an IO maritime environmentalism. And I think there has been some kind of discussion around that particular point. But I'd like to add, given all the presentations that we've had, up to this point, I think it's quite clear that there is a strong, almost position or stance insofar as an IO, I would say maritime, because maritime has specific connotations, but maybe an IO environmentalism. I think that could be teased out a lot more within a particular working group, perhaps constituted, of members, from this workshop. And I'm saying this because I feel, I think quite strongly that there should actually be this alternative, stronger voice actually coming from the IO region, mainly because, at least from the marine scientist perspective, that is the region where the seas are warming the fastest, where there are millions, if not hundreds of millions of people living along the coast. We are most likely to be the ones affected most badly, I think, by a sea level rise and the watery impacts of climate change. And I feel that also, if you look at the geopolitics as well of our region as a whole, there are many threats to the well-being of local communities that live in the sort of coastal context, and the decisions that are being made for both coastal development and offshore development. All of these things affect us. And I just feel, just to bring my question to a point, that we could make the case for an IO environmentalism. It doesn't seem to be the kosher thing to do, because the imperative is to present a global perspective of what this thing could look like. But I mean, I'll just give you a very brief, very local example. Just 2 days ago, I was here in one of the places where you have tailors, where they, in the souk. And I watched very carefully as he cut the item twice before sewing the edges together, and I just think that there's a specificity to environmentalism perhaps that we're not really thinking through or looking at that could be valuable for the Indian Ocean region. Yeah, that's the point, and I wanted your thoughts on that.
Another question? Okay. So.
Doom and gloom. Let's take that. Yeah, that book, Bad Environmentalism, begins with a quote that says, you really can't out-gloom an environmentalist. And so, I think, some of these, we are in moments which, this is the long haul. And so you have to figure whether you have the energy to stay and your alliance has the energy. And I think that this may be a moment to try different things, because, see, honestly, in certain kind of practices, you've got to have things like this that happen over and over again. I find that the ones that get exhausted and extinguished the most are the ones that can't shapeshift and that cannot do something that is slightly emotionally, different. And I don't think I'm not just talking about individual environmentalists, but I'm also talking about the communities that we work with, right? With fishing communities, long histories of so many kinds of adaptations that you have to really unlearn what you think is, this is the end, and, So there's a lot to, I think, learn from the alliances itself on how to deal with something over a long haul, even as environmental practice. And I think that, yes, in this moment, everything looks like it's stacked up. But, if you look at a longer duration of time, then I believe that chinks are there, things happen differently. You just have to be a little more attentive to it. Maybe this is just a salve for the soul, for oneself. But I have not been inspired by stories of doom alone. I think that human condition is such that you need something a little more energizing. So, and especially, yesterday we were chatting about younger people and psychosocial sort of values and their relations. There is a big sort of crisis that is emerging from coastal marine spaces on account of climate change, on account of forced migration and so on, where younger generations are not able to handle, there's a lot of change, right? So what's then your responsibility in the face of that? So that's my somewhat unsatisfactory, but I'm okay with that, really. Yeah, what have I written? Yeah, the role of people's movement. I think that, yeah, this is across the globe, that I think the state forces are, they've lost all patience for people's movements of a certain kind. So in the Indian Ocean region, I mean, the huge elephant in the room is also the role of civil society organizations in supporting social movements. And I think that the sustenance of those social movements, civil society groups, all of that is under question in the wider Indian Ocean. And you kind of have to take that into account in a very serious way. And I mean that, there is no funding support. Social movements don't take place in a vacuum at all. They take place on account of all of these kind of support systems. And I think that there's a systematic sort of attempt to delegitimize that, to actually see that as problematic, anti-state, all of these kinds of things. So turning to social movements is, I mean, I would say that ideologically and so on, yes, that I'm not in favor of a technical sort of approach all the time. Social movements need to be there, but we also have to acknowledge that social movements are facing a massive crisis, just on account of also generational turns and the material basis that really has sustained them in the last 30, 40 years. Yeah. I think that's my, Rose, I take what you say on board. I think that, I mean, those are things that it would be great if somebody is willing to think with me on this, then I'd be more than happy. Yeah, that's good.
So it seems like we're breaking at 3:30. So we sort of have 10 minutes. I don't know if somebody has a question. No. So I think before we end, I have 2 or 3, questions. So the first one is, Sunil, your theoretical framework is, around post-humanism. So the question that I have is, what does it mean to think about post-humanism when some people have never been recognized as human? I'm thinking about what's happening just next to us here, Congo, Sudan, and many places. So what does it mean to think about post-humanism when, we still have people who have never been recognized as such? So the second point has to do with your methodology. I mean, it's wonderful, diffraction, reading. But I wonder how diffraction as a method, is different from, let's say, comparative approaches and intersectional approaches as well. So if there is any difference between both of them. And so the last point, I understand that you're talking about relationality, right, in your reading. So you have relations, you have entanglement, and your agential realism. I wonder if it's not limiting you, in a sense, to do some kind of things. So for instance, when you're talking about, the relations between the women, right, among themselves, you can see there are contradictions. There are contradictions, and if you base solidarity, I mean, for some of the definitions that you gave, you're defining solidarity as, so the basis of solidarity is, let's say, care, right? But also equality. That's what you said in the paper. So I guess there's a problem there, because if that's the case, then relationality is not only about equality, but also about differences. So if you're using your intro, the framework that you propose, there will be a problem. So what would it be to look at, let's say, Edouard Glissant, poetics of relations, because what Edouard Glissant is proposing is that, of course, you have openness, you have to think with other people, but you also maintain some sort of differences. So that, and again, there is always singularity in plurality, if you go with Jean-Luc Nancy and others. So I wonder, what would it mean to integrate all these kinds of model thinking, so that you can at least solve some of the equations that are coming from the framework that you propose.
So thanks for these questions, because they also make me think about the pathway that I have taken here. So post-humanism doesn't mean that we are excluding the humans. Post-humanism in one way is about humans in a more than human world. And from this particular storytelling that I tried itself, we came to see that in a city space, there was a group of fisherwomen who were neglected, who were excluded in the process of city making, in the process of livelihood building. And post-humanism actually brought them to the light. Otherwise, they were considered in a traditional trajectory, they are considered as intruders who are trying to co-opt as a resource. So here, what Braidotti, and many other post-humanists also talk about is, when we look at these entanglements, and in that one of the important component is relationality, we should also be, our methodology should also be capable of finding out the differences of who are missing, who are invisible in these larger discourses, in the larger material discursive practices, who are invisible. So it means that when we look at especially marine-based livelihoods, coastal livelihoods, etc., yeah, and I'll be doing a mistake if I immediately translate this into a larger global scale like Congo or a nation-based kind of a thing. For me, when I look at it from a social ecological system perspective, and from that, post-humanism might be an approach that suits it. Taking that to a global scale or a macro scale, I'm not sure how that would help. So I cannot answer that part of it. But this methodology actually helps in bringing out the invisible and the missing people. Second is that when you ask whether it's comparative or it is not comparative. It is, I am trying to read through the Bombay Duck, the lives of the women, and I am trying to read through the lives of the women, the life of the Bombay Duck. So it is reading through one another, and it is reading through one's own relation. So at a particular time-space context, the Koli women or the Kathiawadi women and the Bombay Duck enter into a relationality, and that entanglement creates a kind of a phenomenon, kind of a possibility of survival perhaps. But this may not be always possible as well. In that particular context, that works well. So it is about I am trying to understand the other through this particular lens, and then vice versa. In that, here and there comparison might come, but it's not about comparison. Understanding the other through. So I am trying to understand you, perhaps through the works of, perhaps if you are working in ancient history, and you have already published 2 works on that, then I want to try to understand how you followed a particular historiography through your works. Through reading through that, I am trying to understand you. So there is a kind of a diffractive methodology that comes in that process, which earlier I have tried with the anchovies, etc., which I have worked with Isabel, etc., and where we were able to really look into it. This is a starting phase in which I am still getting into it. Now, one of the important aspects here about relationality, entanglements, etc., is that we first, usually what we do is that we ascribe the agency of the actors prior. But when we look at entanglements, the agency is, we assume that the agency comes after the relationality. In a particular context, people and the non-human come together. There is a kind of a relationality that forms, and it is through the relationality the agency is created. So that kind of an understanding is important here. So that relationality is sustained through ethics of care, that is through solidarity. Yeah, and but more importantly, what is important is how are we defining entanglement and how are we defining relationality? Are we again step into the trap of having a universal definition of what ethics of care is, what relationality is, and then going and studying something? Or looking at that relationality there are two beings together, they are in the process of becoming, and in that context, what do you understand by relationality? So the context should be capable of bringing out what do you mean by relationality rather than going with a prior definition of relationality. That is what entanglement is also about. Yeah, so.
Let's give a round of applause to our distinguished speaker.